Hey, what is going up guys, it's Gaurav here, back in a video and after a long time. So this video is all about blend modes in After Effects and Photoshop because they are almost same in Photoshop. So without wasting any time, let's get started. Before starting this video, I just wanted to tell you guys that from now I will be uploading frequently, and by frequently I mean I will be uploading like 1 to 2 videos a month. I know it's a really small amount, but I prefer quality over quantity. But if it goes well and you guys will like it, then I'll make it 1 video a week. Now onto the video. If you are anything like me, you may have used a few blending modes in After Effects here and there, but you are totally lost as to what they all do and why you might choose one over the other. My first bit of advice would be to actually open up After Effects and play around with the different modes. However, even after using After Effects for 3 years, I've still found myself confused as to what each of them do and why the heck there are so many of them. So I thought it would be helpful to take a look at all of the blending modes in After Effects and explain what they do. Yep, all of them. So first of all, the question is, what are blending modes in After Effects? A blending mode is a feature used to combine two layers together. If you are applying a blending mode to a layer, it will affect how it interacts with all of the layers beneath it. If you are familiar with blending modes in Photoshop, they work in the exact same way. It's kind of like having a colored filter. Now, how do blending modes work? So how does After Effects render blending modes? Glad you asked. In your timeline, After Effects will look at the bottom layer first, and then I say look at, I mean it will calculate the mask, effects and transformations of that layer. Software doesn't have eyeballs, you silly goose. Okay, jokes apart. Then it will look at the next layer up in the timeline and do the same. At this point, it will combine the top layer with all layers below it based on the chosen blending mode for that layer. By default, it is set to normal, meaning it will simply display the color information on the top layer. Pro tip incoming. With the layer selected, you can jog through the different modes by holding down Shift and pressing minus and plus on the keyboard. Now, the math behind it all. In chapter 9 of the book, Creating Motion Graphics with After Effects, Trish and Krishmir talks about the math behind the modes. They do a wonderful job explaining what After Effects is doing, and I'll try my best to make you understand it. They break down some of the ways that modes can work. When a mode adds to the color values of the layer underneath, the numeric value for every color channel, red, green and blue, is added to the corresponding values of each color channel underneath. So if a pixel has 35% blue on the top layer and 25% blue on the bottom layer, and a mode adds them together, it will output 65% blue, a brighter blue. But if it subtracts the same values, then it will result in a 10% blue, making that pixel darker. Multiply also does just what you might expect. 0.35 into 0.25 will equal 0.0875 or 8.75 strength. Breakdown of each type of blending modes. In order to illustrate the different blending modes in After Effects, I will be using 2 layers. The top layer, source layer, will be a vertical blue gradient which I'll apply the different modes to. The bottom layer, underlying layer, will be a horizontal red gradient for most, and for others it will be a photograph of palm tree. Why a palm tree? Because palm trees are neat. Normal modes. The first section of modes includes the default normal. If the layer is set to 100%, these modes make it so you only see the top layer. Normal. This is the default setting. It just means that the source layer will be the only color visible. If you set the opacity of the source layer to anything less than 100%, then you will start to see the underlying layer. This is sometimes all you need to achieve the result you want. Dissolve and dancing dissolve. With dissolve and dancing dissolve, each pixel will be either the source or the underlying layer, depending on the opacity of the source layer. This mode actually doesn't blend any of the pixels, it simply creates a dither pattern based on the opacity of the layer. So if you have the opacity set to 50%, then half of the pixels will be from the source and half will be from the underlying layer. This is a neat effect because it's similar to blending them with a normal and a lower opacity, but instead of blending, it randomly selects the top or bottom layer on a pixel by pixel basis. Dancing dissolve does the same thing, but it processes it for each frame differently, which creates a self-animating dancing effect. Subtractive modes. All of the subtractive modes darken the resulting image. If a pixel on either layer is black, then the result will be a black. But if one of them is white, it will have no effect. Darken. This mode looks at both layers and chooses a darker of the corresponding color channel values, red, green, and blue. So no matter which layer is in front, it will pick the lower value for each channel on each pixel. Darker color. This functions much like darken, except instead of choosing the darker of the 3 color channel values, it chooses the darker resulting color. Multiply. With multiply, the color is scaled down by the darker of the 2 color values. So it's different from darken because it isn't looking as deep as the channels RGB, but rather just at the color values they create. This mode sort of resembles placing multiple gels in front of light. And you know what? Multiply is one of my most commonly used modes. Linear burn. This uses the top color information to lower the brightness of the bottom layer. It will result in something darker than multiply, and it will also have more saturation in colors. Color burn and classic color burn. This increases the contrast of the underlying layer via the color information of the source layer. If the top layer source layer is white, then it will not change anything. They say it will give you a result that is between multiply and linear burn. The order you stack does matter with these because the bottom layer usually comes through more. Classic color burn is from After Effects 5.0 and earlier. It has some limitations, so it's usually preferable to use regular color burn. Additive modes. A lot of these modes are the exact opposite of the subtractive modes. They make the image brighter. If a pixel on either layer is white, then the result will be white, but if one of them is black, it will have no effect. And this mode is just what it sounds like. The color values of each RGB channel are added together. This always results in a brighter image. It's also one of the most useful modes. If you have an asset that was shot on a black background like fire, this is often a great way to composite it over another image. You can see that more than 50% of the image is adding up to 100% or more, resulting in pure white. Lighten. This is the opposite of darken. It looks at the both layers and chooses lighter of the corresponding color channel values, red, green, and blue. With the opposite color channels for each pixel, it's creating much different color values than when we used darken earlier. Lighter color, the opposite of darker color. It chooses the lighter overall color. Screen is the opposite of multiply. It essentially replicates projecting multiple photos onto a single screen. Just like multiply, I use this one a lot. If I have a layer with a lot of white and I want to overlay the image and let all white drop out, I'll try screen. Linear dodge. the mode will look the same as add at 100% opacity, but if you lower the opacity down, it will start to look a bit less saturated than add. Add and linear dodge look the same at 100% opacity, but when it's set to 50%, you can see there are huge differences in how After Effects composes them. Color dodge and classic color dodge. This increases the contrast of the underlying layer via the color information of the source layer. It's much like color burn, but the opposite, resulting in a brighter image. The bottom layer will be the one that comes through more, so the stacking order is important. Since the bottom layer tends to come through more, the resulting image is more red than blue. Complex modes. These modes work based on luminance, so they will do one thing to the areas that are brighter than 50% gray and another to the areas that are lighter than 50% gray. Overlay. Overlay is definitely one of the most useful modes. It applies multiply to the darker parts and screen to the lighter parts of the top image. This results in something that's very close to the name. It feels like it overlays the top image onto the bottom one. The stacking order is important here because the bottom layer will come through more. Soft light. This is a bit like overlay, but it feels more subtle. Any spots brighter than 50% gray on the top layer will dodge the bottom layer, and anything darker will be burned. So it's sort of a mix of dodging and burning, which is why it's more subtle than overlay. Hard light. This does the same thing as overlay, but it's much more intense. The top layer will show through more than the bottom layer. The blue layer on the top is showing through more than the red gradient below. Linear light. This is another step into the extreme, even more than hard light. The math for linear light is the same as soft light but more intense. So it also does the dodging and burning based on the gray levels. The top layer for this will also show through more than the bottom one. You can see this is much more extreme because of the large blown out white area. Vivid light. Vivid light is yet again more intense than linear light. This also actually adjusts the contrast of the bottom layer. It results in a very high contrast image. Pin light. Pin light will choose between either the top or the bottom pixel based on brightness. So it's a mix of darken and lighten based on that 50% gray level for each pixel. Hard mix. This is a very extreme and strange mode. It will only output one of the 8 basic colors: red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, yellow, black, and white. This mode doesn't really feel too useful on its own, but you can use it to achieve some different compositing goals. Why should I want to do that? One example is to duplicate a layer and then apply a hard mix to the top layer. Now by changing the opacity of the hard mix layer, you can adjust the contrast of the bottom layer. Having a duplicate hard mix layer will push the contrast as you increase the opacity. Difference modes. These modes result in some seriously strange and seemingly useless results, but they can be used for utility, and that's probably why they exist. Difference and classic difference. This subtracts the color values of the two layers and tends to create crazy trippy colors because a lot of colors become inverted. If you duplicate a layer and apply a difference, it will just result in a black image. This can be useful for compositing two shots that are very similar and you are trying to find the difference in them. Here is the bottom layer, and then we add this layer on top. It's hard to tell if anything about this one is different. Apply a difference and there you are, little rascal. Classic difference is only noticeably different when the layer is less than 100% opacity. Classic has more colors in the transition tones than difference and therefore make more saturated colors in those transition areas. You can see less saturation in the transition tones, making those areas more gray. Exclusion. This is a lot like difference, except that it results in less contrast and a bit less saturated colors. When one of the layers is at 50% gray, it will result in gray instead of creating huge color shifts. So essentially it's a bit less trippy than difference. You can see more gray coming out close to the 50% areas on the right side of the image. Subtract. This will subtract the top layer color values from the bottom layers. This means that if the top layer is bright, it will make the result darker and vice versa. So it's kind of backwards. If the layer you are applying it to is bright, then it will make the result darker. Notice how the areas that line up with white of the blue upper layer are pushed to black. Divide. This one is a bit strange too. It will divide the color values, and since the values for black and white are 0.0 and 1.0 respectively, the calculation will be dividing numbers that are less than 1. Okay, time for some math. When we divide by a fraction, it results in a larger number. So 1 divided by 0.5 is the same as multiplying it by 2, aka doubling it. Long story short, the dark areas of divide will make the image brighter. HSL modes. What the fuck does HSL mean? Hue, saturation, and luminance. That's what. These are simple. The name of the mode determines what is kept by the top layer. So if you apply hue to the top layer, then it will lock that in and use the saturation and luminance from the bottom layer. This takes the blue hue from the top layer but then uses luminance and saturation for the red one. Since this just keeps the saturation of the blue layer, we have some gray at the bottom of the image. Color is using both hue and saturation from the top layer and only luminance of the red layer. Luminosity is only using luminance of the blue layer and both hue and saturation color of the red layer. Matte modes and utility modes. All of the modes discussed so far, with the exception of dissolve, have an effect on color values. The rest of the modes all have an effect on transparency instead. These all function quite differently and have a much different purpose than most of the other modes. For this example, I applied the mode to a 50% gray circle with a red gradient below. Stencil luma and slot luma results in a 50% opacity based on the color of the circle. Alpha add. This is a very specific utility mode, and it's much less about combining overlaying image as it is about fixing a problem. If you have ever used a mask to cut something in half and then reverse the matte on second layer, you may have noticed that you often get a seam along the edge where the layers meet. You probably want the object to appear solid and not have that semi-transparent seam. There is a subtle line along the edge of the mask. The solution to this is the alpha add mode. Long story short, it will change the way After Effects does the matte for the anti-aliasing on the edge of the layers, and it will result in a seamless edge. Luminescent Premium. This mode is also about solving a specific problem. Sometimes when you bring a source into After Effects that has pre-multiplied alpha channels, the edges of the alpha channel can be too bright. If this is the case, try bringing in the footage as straight alpha instead of pre-multiplied and then composite it with this mode. Conclusion. I hope this was interesting and helpful for you. I sometimes like to stop and take a look under the hood to better understand what After Effects is doing. I hope you guys have liked this video, and if you did, please hit the like button